introduce yourselves. Sharon, why don't you go first?
Perfect. Hi. Good to see all of you, and thank you for joining us here. I certainly enjoyed your presentation earlier. Your engaging, interactive adventure. So, as for myself, I'm Sharon Anolik, and I am the founder and president of Privacy Panacea, a boutique consulting firm helping companies to build gold star privacy programs that both address all compliance needs as well as really help enable business differentiation, data usage, and data entrepreneurship. So I'm certainly related to what I was saying earlier. I come to this from a number of years in the healthcare privacy space. Most recently was vice president and global privacy risk and strategy leader for McKesson Corporation. On top of big data. A lot there in the healthcare space, where I built their global privacy program and worked on data strategy for the organization a number of years with both healthcare and tech companies in privacy. I'm also a adjunct professor at Golden Gate University on cyber law and privacy. So I love it and breathe it, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you for joining us. And Jane.
Hi, I'm Jane Allen. I'm a partner here in San Francisco with PricewaterhouseCoopers. I'm in the forensics practice and run a practice called information risk management. This is a practice where we've sort of bridged and consult our clients either from a strategy perspective or frankly from an execution or mediation perspective, bridging privacy, cyber, e-discovery, and records all together. There's a lot of sort of the intersection in which companies sort of need to prove out their strategy, their business initiatives, and thinking about all those components in a much more aligned manner. So I'm here in San Francisco and happy to be here as well.
Thank you very much. I should note that in a few weeks we'll be releasing, I have a partnership with Pricewaterhouse and CSO Magazine. We'll be releasing our annual U.S. State of Cybercrime Survey, which looks at insider threats and the world of technology and the risks, and a whole bunch of other stuff that we measure each year with them. So I'm glad you could both join us. I want to keep this interactive too. I have a bunch of questions here, but as we get into this, if you have questions, raise your hand, and let's keep the discussion going as much as possible. One of the issues. One of the debates around kind of the Internet of Things, if we think broadly about all these things we're going to connect to the Internet, you can call it the Internet of Things, is what's the impact from a security and a privacy side? Let's start with the privacy side of it. The privacy part's interesting because we've had this debate for a while now about have we really kind of eroded our expectations of privacy through the adoptions of social media over the last decade. That as we move into an era of this Internet of Things, that people aren't really that concerned about it, and maybe it's not going to be that big a deal.
Well, excuse my little I think it is very true that we have, through our actions and through this social media world that we live in now, have really eroded our own sense of privacy. We don't think about it on a regular basis. We often click, download, go to sites, look for the cool app without thinking through what are the impacts of it, what information is being collected in that process, who has it, what's going to be done with it. And you might think little developer out of a garage that made this fun gaming app is not a big deal if they have info that they've taken out of it, but who are they acquired by, right? What happens to that data? How does it get linked to others? So I think it is true that we have eroded it, but that doesn't change the fact that as we move into this more interconnected Internet of Things, we need to keep privacy at the forefront. As individual users, right? Because in addition to all of the jobs that you hold out there, you're all users as well and consumers. So as individuals, we need to keep it in mind, and as enterprises, we need to be thinking about privacy as well as security right from the front end. Privacy really needs to be baked in. Make it part of the software and product development life cycle. Once you take care of your compliance issues right from the beginning, because there are compliance issues you need to care about. So you take care of those from the beginning instead of slapping them on at the end. But also, it can be a real business differentiator for you. It can both be defensive and offensive, right? Go out there with it as a marketing tool, that you are a company or delivering a product or service that keeps privacy at the forefront, as well as helps you from getting your name on the wrong side of the head.
Jane, one of the things that we look at in another study we do with Pricewaterhouse each year is what is the type of data that's stolen from businesses, and where do businesses invest in? What do they invest in protecting? And what's most stolen is employee data, so your own internal information. And what's least invested in protecting is employee data. It's all focused on external data. Do you think along those lines that businesses, when they're looking at adopting these technologies, have a line that they understand that they are drawing and saying, we're not going to go beyond that point from a privacy or security standpoint, or are they just kind of running into it for the business benefit of it, and then, to Sharon's point, it's painting it on after the fact rather than building it in up front?
So, I think there's a little bit of color related to what industry the client is from, right? Certainly, I think in healthcare and in pharmaceutical and heavy regulated industries know up front some of their obligations, although I do think it's a little bit of, working to mitigate or address those and perhaps not taking that extra step forward to be proactive, right? In other industries, and certainly here in Northern California and Silicon Valley, right here, back door, so to speak, the focus is getting that next product out there, right? Whatever it is. And I think the obvious focus is on what does the consumer think, right? When I'm downloading apps from, Apple, they recognize that's the thing that's at the forefront of our mind that we're thinking about. Are we thinking about all those other areas, and is the client necessarily thinking about that, and the companies? The honest reality is no. We've come in and talked to a number of different companies trying to think about, making them think broader than that, right? First of all, do you really know where all of your data actually exists? And that sounds so obvious, but you would be shocked at how many companies, they know where the core systems are. But when you actually start enumerating all the different places that it exists within your company, and then external, when you think about SaaS and cloud providers, it's actually shocking because they haven't really done the analysis of, okay, have we not only identified all the data, have we attributed some sort of risk value associated with that data, right? As to the content itself or the content in aggregate, if it's more meaningful that way. And then are we protecting it the right way? And most companies haven't really looked at this holistically. They're addressing different pockets right now.
I wonder how long whether it's a matter also when you look at the adoption of these technologies at the consumer level, is it a matter where maybe the consumers don't really get what the real risk is? I had to several times explain to my 15-year-old daughter that if the app is free, you're the product. And she's kind of getting that now, but this understood, you may be giving up a whole bunch of stuff, but and it's the benefit of the business that's obviously offering that, but at the end of the day, do you really understand what you're giving them?
I'll just add that I think from a corporate perspective, companies are constantly doing that sort of teeter-totter, right? Weighing how much security do we want to lock down things versus how open and innovative do we want to be with our employees that expect that in our clients, and especially the competition in the Valley. I think from a personal perspective, right, do you want to get all the value? I realize as Sharon was talking, I'm wearing a Fitbit, right? Do I want to get the fun value of linking with my colleague in New York and we can see how sedentary each one of us is during the week? Or do I want to think about how much of my personal information is being put out there? And one day, if Amazon were to purchase Fitbit and match the data of my shopping habits with Amazon and Fitbit, and they know, okay, well, she's sitting down, for the first part of the morning. It must be a good time to flash a sale in front of her. You don't really think about all that. Even as someone, sort of operating in this space, I forget and need to remind myself what that means sometimes.
And I'll just take that example that Jane gave and say, maybe that doesn't concern you, right? This idea that Amazon might not know. Is it a big deal that Amazon knows that you're sitting down usually between 9 and noon and it's a good time to send you ads? That doesn't feel like a big deal. But is it more of a big deal to you when it's not just Amazon targeting shopping to you, but working in sort of a larger Axiom type big data repository where the number of hours you sit each day, maybe you get that by your insurer, right? Or maybe it comes up in litigation in some way, perhaps you're involved in a custody matter, and what are your practices during the day? Or at night, for that matter. Are you a fit parent? Are you between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m.? You seem to have quite an active lifestyle. So where that data goes and how it is linked to other aspects of your life really comes into play. And I think you hit on the exact challenge for us as individuals and as enterprises is how do we balance the safety and efficiency that comes from giving up some of our data to companies like Fitbit or OnStar or GPS on in-car concierge services where they know exactly where you are, which is what you want if your car goes off the road or you're lost, right, or your tire blows out. You want that. But do you also want that record to be there if perhaps where you went along the way is not what your spouse, partner, or company would have expected? And so balancing those two things is really the challenge. And I think that's where it's incumbent upon enterprises. Where I would like to see us go in this next era is for enterprises to take on the responsibility of being more transparent so that people can really make those choices. Because I don't believe we can make those choices right now.
Because we don't understand what the risk is, or?
We don't have the information. And even for someone like me who lives in this field and tries to go looking for it sometimes, my husband or kids will want to download an app, they're very excited about it. Say, give me a moment, okay? This is going on my shared network as well. Give me a moment to research this, right? I'm the nerd in the house, give me a moment. And I can't find the information. And I'm looking, and there's no privacy policy, or it doesn't say anything meaningful. So even for people who want to know and want to make informed choices, I think it's very difficult. And I think it will be a competitive advantage for companies to be more transparent.
I have a friend who has business, one second. I have a friend who is in the business of evaluating that, mobile risk and mobile apps and stuff. And every time I sit down with him, I walk away completely depressed. It scares the hell out of me.
I scare many people.
Coming back to a fundamental issue that you both raised, this question of what does the consumer think? And so, where are we with regards to that? Who's an exemplar in that space? What does the consumer think about information management practices? And where are people? Basically large enterprise. For example, Target. What did they think their consumers thought, and then what do they think now? Type of stuff. And who's actually aggregating that information, and who's acting on it?
Yes, so many questions there. So I think trying to keep in mind what the end user or the consumer has in their mind, what their expectation is key. I think for most people, they don't have an expectation. They're not thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's not that they think about it and say, ooh, I think this company really, I trust them. I have a strong affinity or relationship. I think they're just not thinking about it. But I believe that will change. And so companies that come out at the forefront and build that trust relationship, I think will be the winners there. And if we look at who's the exemplar, it's tough. It is very tough. And even those that are doing it well, they still have issues. They still have breaches, right? Many of you are in the IT space. There are issues, even with the best laid plans.
I would put forth as an exemplar, or somebody, a provocative case to watch, is what Disney's doing with their Magic Band right now.
Yes. Is everyone aware what that is? Disney invested well over $1 billion in being able to develop smart bands, basically. So when you go in, it's not like, they swipe your hand like they used to, that you actually wear a band. The band uses RFID technology and they have sensors all around the building, all around the park. And as you walk up to the person in the Mickey Mouse costume, they say, well, hi, Johnny, how are you? And he kind of creeps you out. How do you know his name is Johnny? And the scarier part even is that they've invested in voice technology, so when the person in the costume says, hi, Johnny, how are you? It sounds like Mickey Mouse.
So Bob, when you frame it like that, right, that makes us all think, I don't want that on my child. But if framed as, this will help you with line management, managing your time in lines. This will help you find your kid if lost in this very large park. Okay, that sounds different to me, and I may be more open to it.
But it actually goes to the millennial issue. Johnny actually insists on that knowledge. Because Johnny doesn't want to have the mass ride that everybody else rides on. Johnny wants to be in the play. He wants to have that person talking to him. So it's a whole new level of customer expectation.
Well, and I would add, we both have young children, so we're aware of this situation. But I think you're also allowed as a parent to feed them more information about your child, so it feels like a more personal, magical experience, right? Oh, for my daughter, Caitlin, Cinderella's her favorite, so Cinderella can say, I know I'm your favorite princess, and all the other sort of attributes you can feed them. Oh, it's your 5th birthday, it's this and that, and you're not necessarily thinking about it. And I think going back to your question, I think there is in the public right now a presumed level of protection of your information. I think even though with just the multitude of all these examples over and over, I still think people think that there's a presumed protection of the information, and I don't think they really realize that. I think folks are trying to maintain the basic level, and again, folks aren't being proactive enough, because certainly the bad guys are out there being proactive in the next new ways.
And trying to figure out how to take advantage of it.
Exactly.
Good point, right here.
So 2 points drag back a little farther in the conversation, you asked the question about employee data being the most leaked and the least protected. I think my observation would be perhaps the employers aren't thinking about their employees as a customer block that they need to protect data for, and I think that needs to change. And the other thing, the young lady on the right, I don't know which one she is, sorry, didn't pay attention, made a point about the dichotomy between security and what the customer will tolerate, right, locking it down. I think people see that as a dichotomy and not understanding perhaps a basic premise that if we design the system properly, then the user who has access to that data will be the one who will most easily be able to get to it, and the ones who shouldn't be able to get to it will have a very hard time. And I think that's the construct, as opposed to make it really hard for everyone, because then the users go off and do something else. Make it easy for the right person, you need good identity, and make it very difficult for everyone else. Thoughts?
I will tell you that most of the companies that I've been at, speaking to the employee data piece, that I've consulted for, that I've spoken to, when they prioritize their, for example, privacy policies that need revamping and processes evaluated, their own internal employee data always falls to the end of the list, and usually doesn't get addressed across the board, across the industry. So I just wanted to agree with that. And as to the construct, absolutely. That's the holy grail. How we get there as an industry, as enterprises, that's the big challenge. And it's the challenge not necessarily just in the technology itself, but in prioritizing it. So it needs to be prioritized by companies into the software or product development lifecycle. Right? The cost, the development, the UI, actually baking it in from the beginning, and not all companies are willing to do that. They don't see the ROI, the direct ROI. They're willing to take the risk that maybe something goes sideways and then pay for it or deal with it later. And I think back to the user community, if we were more educated, we would demand it more.
But I think identity is the root, and not a lot of people are focusing on that yet, right? And here's the guilty party, right? They put out a product there that doesn't deal well with an identity under the assumption that only the owner will have it.
And I think that speaks to, first of all, I'll say I agree with you completely in terms of the employee data. We've seen that, and I'll also say in our experience, we've seen employee data being one of the first populations that might go out to a cloud provider, right? The HR organization, there are so many different cloud providers, it's very normal. And I was just recently dealing with a client who had a cyber breach. It turns out, and a bunch of their employees had false tax returns filed, which is a whole other issue. That is too. But it was based on a third-party cloud provider. Again, people kind of presumed that was protected, and the company was in a hard position because it wasn't them; it was the other provider. And so that's an interesting dance.
Yeah, who was the risk?
Yeah, to the point of the identity management, sort of individual users, I think that's something that perhaps people haven't cracked the nut on what the right way is. Just a simple password isn't enough anymore. I think my daughter's looked over my shoulder enough times, and even though I might change it every 30 days, that there needs to be, and whether it's thumbprints or whatnot, I think we haven't necessarily cracked the code on what's easy enough for the consumer, what's feasible enough for the actual corporation to kind of make that exchange happen in the way it needs to.
I love the example of the kids looking over your shoulder, right? Because as we all know in the security space, it's about your weakest link, right? You can have a fantastic system, firewalls, great system in place, but it's your weakest link on the chain that's when they can open it up. And let's just say, as cute as they may be, they're not the most trustworthy, but they often see passwords of all sorts of things, talk about it loudly, don't recognize the importance of keeping that confidential.
So I was going to ask you what worries you most, but one of the things that came up today is I get a press release came to my email announcing that Amazon had just launched a wearable technology store today. So it's all Fitbands and Samsung watches and it's pages and pages and pages of this stuff. So clearly the retailer's pushing it. Are we still though? is that just another example of, you know, the cart came before the horse because we haven't really thought about it or had a discussion? Or is it just we're never going to have that discussion? The nature of technology now is just full steam ahead and let's get it adopted and we'll deal with the problems later.
I think we're going to have the discussions and we're going to go full steam ahead.
Yeah.
It's about market demand, and the market wants wearables. They're excited by them, right? Whether it is the Fitbit, and most people are wearing them. Whether it's Google Glass, if you can get your hands on them, or even some of the more advanced ones, the smart contacts that actually can read your glucose levels for diabetics, is something Google is working on developing right now. There's some amazing advantages and opportunities for us in using wearables to manage our health, our nutrition, our weight, our exercise, really some serious medical issues as well. So the advantages are very significant, and often is the case, especially when there's a medical or health component, we're willing to overlook the privacy or security risks because it might help us today, it might help us with our blood pressure, our diabetes, any of our other conditions, we're willing to overlook it. So I think there will be discussions, and I think that the privacy and security conditions and terms and access to it will improve, but they won't stand in the way of people wearing their wearables.
I think you've got a question in the back that I'll add to it quickly, but I think that the sad part, and we've seen this happen over and over again, is that it's going to take some bad incident to happen.
Right.
A breach or some other potentially a physical security incident as related to all of these before the public kind of gets some awareness and thinks about it again.
Mm-hmm. Back here, and we'll work our way around.
I want to go back to the points that you brought up earlier. So I know we're kind of talking about a corporate space, which of course is a big thing because we're talking about the corporate space. But the Internet of Things is really what scares me, because just today I heard that a couple in Ohio had their baby monitor hacked. And, you know, talking about baby security products, I don't know how people are really doing that into wearables. I am worried because I'm aware of IRM, you know, basic privacy, security, stuff like that. And most people out there in the consumer market have no idea. That's why I'm kind of wondering, how do we really secure the Internet of Things? Because it's here now, and it's going to get bigger.
That's a good question. So really, at the end of the day, how do we secure the Internet of Things? I wonder, do we treat it any differently than we treat our IT environments? I mean, are these just a whole bunch of endpoints that we need to secure? Or do we need to be looking at it differently? Jane, why don't you?
I think we're both to say both, probably, right? I think there's the individual endpoints, and then you have to think in aggregate of all that information. Because if someone finds your weakest link to get in, you don't know what they're going to have access to. And oftentimes it's not just that one thing, and it could be multiple things. And in aggregate, that data can be far more meaningful than even just, you know, my iPhone isolated by itself.
I think the target breach is an interesting example of that, right? And we'll learn more as more information is revealed on that. But at least early indications are saying that it was likely through an HVAC vendor.
Yeah.
Right? That may not be on the top of your IT security team's, red list, right? As the HVAC vendor, or the company that comes to pick up your shredder, your shred boxes, or the janitorial staff. But all these are folks who have access. So I think that's one aspect when you say, where is the risk? Some of the risk is the same risk we've been seeing for years, but there are many more endpoints now. There are vendors, I saw some down in the expo hall, that are sort of API managers that are working with some of these companies, for example, car companies that want to have more smart technology in the cars. They're working to be the sort of security API vendor that manages the access points. Who can control what will happen with that car? Who can see it? Who can control it? You don't want someone controlling it other than you when you're driving it, right? So there's a safety issue to what they can actually see. So I think there will be more companies in that space.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I think that at some point, the lack of the discussion forces regulators to step in and issue regulation, which becomes a whole other issue, because I know very few of these small startup companies offering little apps here, little apps there, little technologies here that have a chief privacy officer or chief security officer, or anyone that's actually, general counsel that's actually versed in that type. A question right there.
Yeah, I guess first a quick statement. regarding the Internet of Things from an enterprise standpoint, I think the fundamental premise you have to go in with is that they're all untrusted endpoints, right? And that really they're no different than anything else on the internet. They're just providing information that has to be fundamentally untrusted. I wanted to follow up on Jane, your comment about data breaches and identity as it pertains to SaaS providers, because most of the Internet of Things providers are attached to a SaaS service that has some idea of identity associated with these things. We tend to think of them as consumer things, but very often they're machine things. In fact, the far greater majority of these things are machine things. And while we all worry about physical human security, the ability for us to manage the identity of a machine sucks even worse than the ability to identify the human being, right? So just the other day, somebody brought in 6 Wi-Fi enabled toolboxes. A freaking Wi-Fi enabled toolbox that phones home and tells the vendor what tools are and are not in the toolbox. So that, coupled with Wi-Fi enabled drink machines, coupled with everything else that is being brought into our enterprise, presents a whole lot of untrusted endpoints coming into our organization, right? So this Internet of Things is basically crowding in upon us, right? So we want some of that information. We don't want a lot of it. But in terms of managing that identity aspect, right now, I can't manage the identities for the humans that are in my company, much less all of the things. Is the answer for me to stop trying? Is the answer for me to look to external third parties to manage the fundamental notion of identity? Or is the answer for me to start investing a lot of money in services and consulting companies to develop identity frameworks and identity management disciplines?
Well, I'll start, and I bet Sharon will have some to add to it. I'll just say that, one, I do think IT security and IT departments are grossly underfunded, or perhaps not funding the right types of activities. Again, I say proactive, but I think proactive has to be the new norm. And most companies aren't there, which is the sad thing. Particularly to your SaaS and cloud providers, it's a really scary notion, and some of it boils down to the actual contractual logistics. The same time something happens after the fact, someone lawyers up, has the government issuing subpoenas, hands are tied, and if you're left holding the bag because you were the entry point of collecting, or you were the person ultimately responsible, it becomes a very difficult situation. I'll go back to one of the things that I talk about a lot is, to the extent possible, and this is where it gets a little fuzzy because there's advantages to having lots of data, but to the extent possible, if you don't need it, there's no business value, get rid of it. You don't have to protect it if you don't have it. And I think people, we're hoarders by nature. We assume, one day we might need it. I think if there's that kind of philosophy you can work in, that's to your benefit as well.
Yeah, and I just watched a panel from at the Federal Trade Commission, and that was they had a person in the panel from Canada, and she said, that's our rule up there. If you don't need it, don't collect it. So of course, we tend to think, well, we might need it someday, so it'd be nice to have it, right?
We're hoarders.
One final question. We're actually running out of time. It's very compressed today.
You mentioned that companies put employee privacy way down the list of priorities. Does that open them up to lawsuits by employees and maybe regulatory actions in states where they might have stronger privacy laws?
It's interesting, we haven't seen it really. I mean, it's an area that is sort of uncharted. I think generally what happens is employees just aren't thinking in the same way that the average user or consumer is, who might run to a plaintiff's firm to sue. So we just haven't seen a lot of that, but as far as is there risk there for the companies, I would tell a company absolutely there's risk for that. In that trust, reputation, as well as legal and financial.
And Sharon probably knows this far better, is just the whole network maze of privacy law is incredibly confusing and changing every moment. I don't know that anyone's got a full grasp on it. All you can do is sort of chase after it, right?
So let me ask each of you for a final time. I mean, we could talk about this for 3 or 4 hours easily, but advice for businesses looking at, how they're using these types of devices, or just kind of thinking of the broader Internet of Things and this explosion of devices that they're having to manage. What should they be thinking about? What advice would you offer?
I mean, I guess I'll start with, especially being here in the Bay Area, both of us, I don't want to be accused of stifling creativity, innovation, and such. That's such a driver for our economy and all that most of us probably in this room do. So I think there's the balance again, right? So other than get rid of what you don't need, because again, there's so much advantage to that. I would say you've got to approach everything with a risk-based sort of view. You can't boil the ocean all at once, so again, try and approach from a risk-based view, looking at it from different levels, right? From the business, from the consumer, from the executive. You've got to look at it from different angles and try as best you can and rank those and go after the ones that you know are most critical and work your way from there and reevaluate often as well. I think that's all you can really realistically do right now.
Great. Thank you. Sharon?
Absolutely. So I would say 3 things are often vilified: interconnectivity, Internet of Things, and big data. Right? They're big, they're scary, bad things will happen to us. If you look at the cover of so many of the magazines, right? Big data, and there's almost like a siphon image of a death.
I didn't choose that picture.
Is that your magazine? And I would just say that it's not true at all. Data can be such a wonderful thing for us as companies, as individuals. Data is what will change and better our lives. Safety, efficiency, medical care, treatment, accuracy, delivery, all of these things. And so if we can get past it's scary part as consumers and as companies, and instead focus on how do we use it smartly and responsibly, how do we bake security and privacy into the front end of the cycle, and then try to be transparent to the public, I think we'll be having very different conversations in the future.
Good. It'll be interesting to see where we are a year from now. So, Sharon, Jane, thank you so much.